John, can you hear?
I can, I'm here.
Okay, no, I just want to make sure that you can hear me, that's all.
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. Yes, I'm here.
Hi. And who else is online? Alexander. Okay, great, Alexander. Thank you very much for taking the time, Alexander.
Thank you. It's a
Hi,
pleasure. Hi, hello, everyone.
Hi. Hello. Well, I'm trying to turn this thing on. Here's the agenda. Well, look, welcome, and thank you very much for taking the time to join us today at ERCST. For those of you that can pronounce ERCST, I think it's a pretentiously named a public debate. It is meant to be a public debate. I hope it's a public debate, but we will call it a public debate after the debate takes place. So the intention is for a public debate. And really, it's very much about a debate on flexibility in the EU transportation decarbonization policies. I don't need to tell the people in this audience that the importance that the transportation plays in the emission mix of the EU, the fact that it really has a long way to go before we reach where we need to be, and that there's been quite a bit of controversial discussions, including this morning with the president of the commission making statements that is altering the current understanding. We're not quite clear exactly how, but clearly there's some change. I'm an electrician. I declare that. So we have two people. You have John Cooper, who used to be in his other life the head of Fuels Europe, and I'm an electrician. I spent 20 odd years in the electric power industry. So we try to keep it as balanced as possible. We would have liked to have even more balance in the panelists. We've made every effort to ensure that, but we hope that those people that have agreed to be part of this discussion are going to be strong advocates for their point of view. And it is very simple. I mean, what we wanted is two things to discuss. What are the technical, economic, and social challenges in deciding on a policy approach for the decarbonization of transportation? And the second one is sustainable fuels and electrification. Are they complementary or are they competitive? So is this something either or is a place for everybody, and maybe there's a place for everybody at the right time, the right moment, and depending how things evolve. So it is not a very complicated debate, but it is an important debate that ERCST would like to participate in. There are many people in this town that you well know that have been very long time associated with the debate on transportation. With a little bit more newcomers, but as our title will say, the roundtable on sustainable development and sustainable transition, climate change, sustainable transition. This is an important part of what we do, and we would like to be able to kind of weigh in at the point where the auto industry in Europe is clearly going through some very, very traumatic moments, and that impacts the whole European economy. No kidding. We see how also the kind of the debate that many in the fuels business are bringing in the elements about the continuity and the existence of the industry in Europe, and the importance of the industry for European transformation and European number of European activity, including defense. So it's quite a not a simple discussion, and discussion that is very, very timely if you want. I will not go into much more discussion than that. So just repeating that the two questions that we want to discuss are the technical, economic, and social challenges in deciding on a policy approach for decarbonization. And the second one is sustainable fuels and electrification. Are they complementary or are they in competition? I will invite John Cooper, who is not with us in body, but in spirit, and is on the telly, as they say, over across the aisle. So John, you heard my initial declaration. I'm a long-time electrician, and once an electrician, always an electrician. John, you have the floor.
Thank you, Andre. I should have told you actually over a beer or something. I was an electrician before I went to the fuels guys, actually. So that's something for another conversation for another day. Look, thank you for having me as part of the panel today. Actually, one of the reasons that I can't be with you in person is that I've just come from a meeting with about 7 industries discussing how these industries together make something work for the Fuel EU maritime regulation. And what was fascinating about that experience was that there was around 7 companies representing 7 industries in the room. And actually, it was a very good illustration of how flexibility in that regulation is spurring quite a wide range of different investments. And there are some uncertainties because different technologies may compete with each other. But there's a very clear direction and multiple different ways and multiple different industries we're discussing together how they build something that will be a very powerful set of investments and a very strong way of complying with Fuel EU Maritime. We're here today to talk mostly about road transport, but its connections also to other transport fuels and energies, because road transport often dominates in the conversation. And certainly in the news at the moment, there's a great deal of conversation around how the auto sector, cars and trucks, are being treated and their future under the regulation of CO2 in cars and CO2 in heavy-duty trucks. So the whole idea is we do have to talk about that. Now, let me start by saying my understanding of this conversation is we don't need and shouldn't be talking about relaxing GHG or CO2 ambition here. It's not about that. It's about, is it worthwhile adding in new ways of achieving the GHG targets? I think it's also worth reflecting that I'm going to try and speak for, probably a majority that I know in Brussels who would agree that certainly for cars, the heavy lifting of decarbonisation needs to be done by electrification. I don't think anybody is really disputing that. Maybe there's less consensus around heavy duty, but one of the key questions here is, in terms of what we need to achieve for that objective, how are we doing on this policy at the moment? Is it really working? Is there something else that could work? And also, what are we missing out by having a policy that really focuses exclusively on electrification? Now, I think it's worth noting there are some troubling signs around this policy. First of all, it's clear that many car makers were struggling to comply with 2025 levels and would have been on track for paying some very significant penalties. We also know that while they haven't been paying penalties, they have been paying other companies for some years to comply through the pooling. And we can now see that most of that money has gone to US and Chinese companies and has created very significant competitors at a geopolitical level, shall we say. And we can now see that the future of electrification in Europe will have to have some significant dependence on US, Korean, and Chinese value chains. And we're seeing more and more concern around geopolitical factors there. And so with that and with other factors in mind as well, we have struggled in Europe to get a battery industry up and running. A lot of money went into Northvolt for all very good reasons, but we are very far behind on batteries and access to materials. I'm speaking at the moment from the UK. British Volt was a copy of Northvolt and was even more unsuccessful, shall we say. And so we have some headwinds in terms of making substantial electrification. I still stand by my earlier statement. It really has to be the heavy lifting. But I think there's a key question here. Does this objective actually deserve what is essentially a technology monopoly that's provided by the current regulation? Or should we be considering how we adapt regulation to be more flexible, to recognize low carbon fuels? Actually, we could recognize low carbon electricity in that as well, but also steel or other materials. And rather than turn this into a debate about should we keep the ICE ban or not, I would suggest that all of the panelists talk about what do they need to build on the levels of investment and growth in their sectors, including the electricity industry. If we moved away from a full ban of the ICE and recognized other technologies, what do you need to keep up the momentum that you've got in preparing for electrification and enabling electrification? So what I'm heading at is, Is there a sweet spot here where multiple technologies are recognized, but we actually get more investment in low carbon technologies for all of the sectors represented here, and also give customers some choice as well? That's what I'd like to explore. Let me leave it
Okay,
there,
John.
Andre.
Thanks a lot, John. Look, I don't own EV. I've driven a few in my life, but I'm not rich enough to have a Tesla. So I'm also looking with envy at the people that have one. And it is quite clear that there is actually there was an article this morning in the FT. I think it was BYD, and the vice chair of BYD, I think, was making a statement that for us and Tesla, we are not enemies, we are friends, and the enemy is the internal combustion engine. I think something to that effect. Quite an interesting and strong statement. Look, we try to provide balance. I don't think we totally succeeded, but I will weigh the scales and make sure that there is a balance in the debate. And if I have Kelly in here, I'm not afraid of somebody not being vocal, so that I know that he knows how to defend his view. But it's not about being defensive. It's literally, it is this. Is there a sweet spot? Are these competitive technologies? Then one will survive, the other one will die. Is there a transition? You know, it's that kind of a conversation, and we generally want to have an open discussion. So what we have invited, and we have on the panel today, is Kilian O'Donoghue from Euroelectric, Alexander Reich from the Polish New Mobility Association, Lars Hummel from eFuel Alliance, Alessandro Bartelloni, Fuels Europe, Stefano Murace, Eurogas, and Ana Alvarez, Repsol. As I said, less than balanced, but you bear with me. So I think that you have a presentation at the beginning, Kilian, and I will give you the microphone, and he will put the stuff on the screen.
Very good. So thanks, Andre, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. So I'm Kilian. I'm from the European electricity sector. We are somewhat a minority. It's not quite Zelensky going to the White House to get ambushed, but I'm aware. No, I'm joking. No, but we appreciate being able to give our viewpoint here. So thanks very much, and it will be a good open debate. So Euroelectric, our raison d'etre is electrify society, and kind of three main sectors: buildings, industry, and obviously transport, and that's going to focus on today. So kind of three key messages or main things we would say is firstly that direct electrification is the optimal solution in transport. Obviously, it's more nuanced than that. We would say for light duty vehicles, we consider the debate largely done. Electrification has won. I think for heavy duty vehicles, it's still a debate. We do think electrification will win out, but that is a proper debate. And for maritime and aviation, we have to acknowledge it's much more nuanced than that. Yeah. So that's kind of how we would see it. The second thing is e-fuels. We do think that there's major legitimate questions about the availability of e-fuels, how many there really is, if we're supposed to use these as a viable alternative. We think if you have limited e-fuels, you should use them, which are in very hard to abate sectors like maritime and aviation. And finally, it's so if we are going to electrify transport, what do we need to do? I think the biggest obstacle we see now is actually on the grids. So we need to build the necessary electricity grids to electrify transport. That's kind of what we see the obstacle. And for that, we need to invest more. We invest 38 billion a year in our grids. That needs to double. And we need to incentivize a thing called anticipatory investments. So that's being able to invest in knowledge of future demands. At the moment, when you want to build a grid, you're very, very constrained based on regulatory rules. So anticipatory investments is the biggest thing we should ask for. One thing which I didn't mention here, which I probably should have said, and it's linked to what John said, is we need a proper industry policy to kind of incentivize in electrification. I think obviously China has overtaken us on the production of EVs. I have a Polestar myself, which is a Chinese-Swedish kind of conjunction, but we do see the Chinese companies coming to dominate. It's just important that in Europe with electrification transport that we're able to compete, and we will have access to necessary raw materials to make that happen. So if I just continue a few simple slides, Electricity. So why are we electrifying society? It's pretty simple. 3/4 of power today is decarbonized. Okay. That in terms of competing energy vectors, we're far, far ahead of any other alternative. And that needs to be acknowledged. Okay. So 74% of electricity today is decarbonized. If I compare with hydrogen, the reality today is that 96% of hydrogen is made using fossil fuels. I know we're going to try and promote renewable hydrogen, but the reality today is very different. That's why electricity is a much better vector. Second is it's just more efficient. It's about 3 times more efficient running things off electricity compared to hydrogen. And if I go to the next slide, which is not just hydrogen, it's more e-fuels, you see some of the limitations. I think there's probably 2 things I would mention is, the limitations and unproven technology. Why would we bet on an unproven technology when we have a proven technology in electricity? Second thing is just security of supply risks. The power sector future is going to be dominated by wind and solar and hydropower. We have that in Europe. We're not dependent on imports. So when we electrify transport, it's better in terms of secure supply. We have more control. At the moment, we are very exposed to fluctuations in fossil fuel prices, both oil prices for internal combustion engine cars and gas prices, which we know gas goes into electricity. If I go to the next slide. So this is just the uptake. I think we need to have the necessary build outs of the grid matched by the necessary EVs. I think 22% of all cars in Europe last year were EVs. That number is much higher in China, and we should be concerned about that. If we look at electrification rates in Europe, we're at 23% today, and we were at 23% 10 years ago. If we look at electrification rates in China, it was 19% 10 years ago. Now they're at 27%. So their electrification rate is going like this. Over half their cars are EVs. We risk falling behind. We risk a certain region becoming an electro state where they have all the key technologies and the value chain to support that. And I would agree with John's comment, the battery value chain is extremely important. And it's important that in Europe, we try to get a foothold on that. What happened in Northvolt was very unfortunate, but hopefully we can learn to compete going forward on these value chains. And I think I just have one last slide, if that's okay. So what do we need? 3 things we picked out. First is regulatory certainty. That means implementing what is agreed. We are ahead in terms of AFIR. That's the Alternative Fuels Regulation, building out the infrastructure. So that is good. We need to implement all these pieces of legislation. We also need regulatory certainty. I don't want to go into too much detail in terms of what we should do with regards to efficiency standards of cars. Announcements are going to be made. We don't want people to lose jobs in Europe. It's important to maintain European competitiveness. So we are sympathetic to those arguments. The ICE ban for 2035, we think that makes sense. I think we need to give a clear signal that we're going to electrify light-duty vehicles, and thus we can plan. We can make the investments. I look at Daniele, his company. He needs to know, are we going to electrify transport? Do I build the electricity infrastructure in knowledge that this is going to happen? That's why the ICE ban is so important. Yeah. And the second thing, as I mentioned, is grids. Let's invest heavily in grids and let's incentivize anticipatory investments. And the final thing is we need an industrial policy to support this. We should try and build the EV value chain in Europe. That's both the raw materials, the batteries, but also the manufacturing of the EV cars. And finally, we should have kind of some demand side stimuluses to make that happen. There's some good ideas. I think the MEP, Thomas Perler and Carolan, even though it's a first-time MEP, seems extremely knowledgeable. And he's kind of come with some good ideas with regards to tax incentives, social leasing, even for corporate fleets, you can incentivize EVs. We think all these things will assist the electrification of transport. So to conclude, we would say, it's not a competition. The future is going to be both electrons and molecules, but we do see electrons playing a much greater role and becoming in a more dominant position, given that it's just a much more efficient technology. And we need to be honest about that. Thank you.
Thank you, Killian. There's no competition. We're going to kill them. Okay. Look, I tell you what, Alexander, you're number 2 on the list here, but in the name of some tentative balance, I think that if I let you guys go first, the 2 of you go first, then it's going to be 4 in a row of different views. So I'd like to go first to Lars, if possible, and I'll come back to you, Alexander, okay?
That works.
Yeah, thanks a lot. My name is Lars. I represent the eFuel Alliance. So we are around 170 companies around the value chain of synthetic fuels. I don't have slides. I could technically use the ones from Kilian because there's a lot of arguments against e-fuels included. I have a little bit more balanced view on that. I think it is an and not an or. I think we need synthetic fuels. We need all renewable fuels in line with the Renewable Energy Directive. And I have also no doubts that large shares of the cars in European roads will be electric in the future, but I don't think that the optimistic scenarios that were shared in the beginning will actually turn out as they were hoped to be. I wanted to start with some numbers because it also answers a little bit the question why road is so important. We have the transport sector is 31% of final energy consumption in Europe, and that's with 73% that goes in the road sector. And that's with over 90% that is fossil fuels at the moment. I think that shares a lot of the challenges we are facing in decarbonizing that sector. I will come in a few seconds also on the part that electrification is already playing, and also on the fleet renewal that I see really a critical bottleneck at the moment. What is also important to mention is that Europe is an energy importer. In the past, it was around 50%. So we also have to look at about how we decarbonize our energy system. You mentioned already that electrification is with 75% decarbonized, but it's 20% of the energy mix. So there is an 80% that is mostly fossil. So it's the whole picture needs a little bit more than only electrification. That also refers to if you look at the increasingly demand that will come to electrification, if you want to electrify everything. So we need to build a lot of electric energy in terms of coping with all this demand. From those numbers, like the first recommendation I wanted to make is that we need to have a renewable fuel strategy. We have a lot of strategic dialogues now. We have a lot of action plans now in the Commission. I think we should also establish something like that for the fuel sector because we have to decarbonize this share in the energy market. That has to include an importing aspect. It has to include a domestic aspect. It has also to include a cross-sectoral look at energy consumption. The second point I wanted to make is that we have currently 256 million cars on the road in Europe with a share of less than 2% electric vehicles. So that makes around 250 million cars that have to be renewed. We have a registration of around 10 million cars a year. We have 2025, 2050 want to be climate neutral. That makes 100% fleet renewal every year of 25 million cars if you want to have only electric vehicles in 2050. It's a little bit simplified, I know, but it shows, given that we have about 15% of new registered battery electric vehicles, that we are not on track. I'm in Germany. We had 15 million electric vehicles. That was the goal in 2030. The realistic scenarios look at 7 to 8 million electric vehicles on the road in 2030. So the second message I want to send here is we need a plan B. Plan B is meaning we have to follow plan A, which is electrification, but we have to follow a plan B too. That also addresses risks that are not affected only to the fleet renewal. We are looking at a geopolitical tense situation. We have a lot of materials that are processed or with origin from China. We have a charging infrastructure that is not yet how it should be. We have grid bottlenecks. We have electricity uptake. So we have a lot of things we have to solve. So I think it's the wrong approach to exclude the technology already now. I mentioned strategy dialogues. Tomorrow there will be the automotive action plan. For us, it's pretty clear that we need to revise the internal combustion ban. I think it was a wrong legislation from design in the beginning. We should not look only at the tailpipe. We should look at the energy of the CO2 intensity of the energy carrier used. I also believe we should do the review as soon as possible because those industrialized capacities are not appearing out of thin air. It takes time to build them. You mentioned the capacity already that we don't have yet industrialized e-fuels production or RFMBO production, if you take the legal word. That is, of course, also true because if you limit the market, then it's really difficult to get FIDs and to build capacity. Taking also the 75% of the transport sector consumption of energy, road is key when it comes to investments in the sector. That is also to the benefit of other sectors. The hard-to-abate sectors, aviation and maritime sector are in the most common synthesis route byproducts. So you want to produce for all sectors if possible to produce cost efficient. So we have good legislation in the aviation maritime sector in that regard with long-term planning security. We don't have that for road. I mentioned the CO2 standards. The second part of this discussion is the Renewable Energy Directive. Our position was 5% e-fuels in 2030. That would be way more capacity than now is announced. That was also the position of the Commission and the Parliament. Unfortunately, the Council brought it down to 1% with multipliers. So I think that's insufficient, and we need to start talking about how to provide a pathway until climate neutrality. Then I wanted to also mention, because that's all also going into the climate discussion, because we have to be ambitious. That's a little bit forgotten nowadays with all the competitiveness and industrialization topics, which are all important, but we should not forget to be ambitious in terms of climate policy. And another aspect I want to mention is also the other affected sectors by the switch to electric only. In the last revision of the CO2 standards, the supplier association CLIPA did a study on jobs that could be affected. They came up with around 500,000 jobs that are affected by a better electric only approach. I read newspapers every morning. There is a lot of announcement on job cuts. I think that is not necessary if you would have started with a technology open approach in the beginning. Last point on that direction is also that opening the CO2 standards would be legislative consistent. RFMBOs are zero rated in the emission trading system. The red defines with sustainability criteria what is renewable, what is not. Aviation and maritime have sectoral legislations which conclude that renewable fuels are renewable and decarbonize the sector. The only sectoral legislation that does another approach is the car sector. I want to bring one last remark in the regard of de-risking investment and bring down cost. We are supportive of targeted funding, which is done in H2 Global, which is done with the Hydrogen Bank. I think that are good initiatives. What is core important for us is that we finalize the Energy Taxation Directive. I was really pleasantly surprised that this was included in the Clean Industrial Deal as priority from the Commission, that it encourages the Council to finalize the discussion. We need that. That's a huge price lever to bring down cost. If we differentiate between renewable and conventional energy carriers, that has to be done as soon as possible. And also we have when it comes to pragmatism, we have a really strict production criteria in the Renewable Energy Directive, which we would like to see a little bit simplified. To conclude, and I look at my time, I'm more or less in the 10 minutes, so good timing here. For me, it makes sense to include renewable fuels in all sectors. That increases the capacity and brings down cost. It will de-risk investment. It has additional emission saving. It has a climate benefit. It has economic and social benefits because it creates new jobs as well as protects old jobs. And it also de-risks the geopolitical situation. And with that, I conclude and thank you for listening.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Lars. Let me go back to Alexander. Again, the questions on the table really are, what are the challenges and are these complementary? But I will come back to a number of things and what is the motivation and in various jurisdictions. Something that you should think about, because we are in a situation right now where China obviously has made a jump in that direction, and they are being driven by, I think, their own energy security concern primarily, but let's be blunt about it. The United States of America, which is not a minor market, it also seems to be kind of trying to think as to what its policy is, but certainly looks like the new administration is, the incentive that existed in the IRA are not going to be there. And Europe feels that they should plow ahead with the European Green Deal and especially in transportation. So how are this all going to merge together? Because we are also living in a global world and markets are what they are. Alexander, from your side, I think that in Poland, I know Marcin and yourselves and others who are quite committed to e-mobility and quite passionate about it.
That
Go
we
ahead,
are,
please.
yes. Thank you. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here, and it's a pleasure to discuss it, especially at this momentous day with the President of the European Commission communicating in the morning and us all expecting next steps tomorrow. So yes, I represent PSNM. We are quite a big organization. We have nearly 300 members. That's the entire automotive charging industry, hydrogen refueling industry, battery industry, and various other industries involved in this transition. We are called New Mobility because we perceive it as an ecosystem, which also includes grids, energy storage, and a much wider outlook. We are also involved in aviation and maritime and rail transport. So there, I agree, this battery electric solution may not be fully applicable or applicable at all. In terms of road transport, however, we are quite radical, maybe not as some of our colleagues from Transport Environment, but definitely in many ways, we do find similarities. I myself am a co-founder of this organization, a master in law, and now working a PhD on hydrogen powertrain. So completely different world. But in terms of the data in Poland, we are, a nascent market, and e-mobility is a huge opportunity for us in all of its entirety. So from fleets to charging to energy storage solutions based on this, as well as the grid investments related to DSO investments and other such developments. So obviously, with less than 80,000 electric vehicles in a 20 million car fleet and 9,000 charging points in one of the biggest geographically countries, one of the 5 biggest in Europe, there is still a lot of work to be done. Hence, we looked at this as an opportunity. And to be honest with you, we have tested this and looked into it with economic institutes here in Poland, looking at what it can generate, what can all those sectors generate. Electric mobility for passenger vehicles, for heavy-duty vehicles, for charging in the industry, for software development, for batteries, for battery recycling, which, mind you, is projected to grow more than 5 times since 2023 by the end of the decade. So all these investments, all these related businesses can grow the Polish economy by 5% of GDP in 2035. But the direction has to be maintained. And this is a little bit of a problem we have with some of the discussions that we hear. Because if you look at Europe, these numbers seem to be very similar. So for Poland, you have 400,000 jobs, and 260,000 of these jobs in the automotive industry are related to ICE engines. We want them to transition to all the industries related to electric mobility because it's 8% of our GDP today. Lithium-ion battery production is 3% of our annual export value. TSL, we have the 3rd largest fleet in Europe as of this year. We were first last year. Is 7% of our GDP. It's 700,000 jobs. It's 130,000 companies in Poland. So it's a huge market. Now, these markets will only be saved if they become decarbonized quickly. Why? Well, because Western Northern EU states will gladly take over these bits of economic potential. And this is the truth. And we see it already in some of the newest vehicle production. It's going away from Poland, going back into its host markets. And that is not something that worries us per se, but we would like to develop some kind of excellence in this industry. For Europe, we did this exercise of looking at all the investments that can be done related to electromobility development. And we did it with McKinsey, with eMobility Europe, what used to be known as AVAIR, and Charge Up Europe. And the value of these investments can exceed 200 billion euros, but it has to be strictly dedicated to zero emission battery electric powertrains. There are 600,000 jobs that can be generated to that, to add to the 6 million already in the automotive industry. 16% more, we can grow the entire value of the automotive sector. We would have to have 63 million vehicles by 2030, electric, battery electric, and we would have to manufacture 1.7 terawatt hours of batteries by 2030. Now, I agree, Norvolt, not very successful. However, we do have Verkor, for example, which is often omitted in these discussions, a highly successful venture. And I think batteries can be manufactured successfully. Of course, I would agree to the argument that was brought up with a comprehensive industrial strategy, because to make this work, you need to have much more intelligent support. So first of all, metallurgical refining for critical raw materials, which is nearly inexistent in Europe, is something that would have to be developed. A lot of this focus on metallurgical chemistries, especially for recycling, for hydrometallurgical processes, that is something we have to shoot for. And I think for Central Eastern Europe, that is an incredible chance to kind of balance the traditional automotive leaders and clean energy leaders with this kind of support of this industry. And this is something I think we have to look for. We see with some of the steps that have been taken, especially regarding the import of Chinese battery electric vehicles, that e-mobility is actually not gaining from this. So I again agree that the EU industrial policy has to be comprehensive. And so we cannot basically go back on our own word, and we have to send clear signals. We actually had a drop by 0.2% of EV registrations, just below 2 million new vehicles. So we have less than 17% of the market penetration. It's actually interesting that the UK took over Germany when Germany registered 150,000 less BEVs this year than it did in 2023. But interestingly enough, Volkswagen actually sold more BEVs than Tesla. So the market it's very, I would say, there's a lack of stability. And I think it's referring also to this legislative problem. So, in 2021, we saw what the Fit for 55 package was planned to look like. We were highly, of course, supportive of this. So I think looking at all these arguments, you have to understand that if you change the parameters, the provisions of the CO2 standards, be it for passenger vehicles, light delivery, or for heavy vehicles, you're changing enormous decisions regarding investments, product deliveries, and market growth. And for our market, this is crucially important not to do that. We think that already this decision that we anticipate will be made, so this kind of 3-year leniency for some of the automotive producers, will already delay BEV deployment, and mostly in Central Eastern Europe, actually. So the problem is always most felt here when it comes to this innovative going forward. And that's our problem, because it's not only Poland. We are the biggest market here geographically, population-wise, but we are very similar to all these countries between the Baltic region to the Balkan region. And this is a big chunk of Europe. And it's actually nearly half of the population if you include Italy, which is also dropping in BEV registrations and industrial output. So this means that changes and lack of stability in these policies are really impacting the economic development and social well-being of a huge part of Europe, and as I said, half of it. So what the problem with that is we're referring to technologies that often, I think, don't really name the real context of what is being applied in the powertrain. So obviously, we have this issue of having 23% of CO2 and GHG emissions in the EU from transport. Yeah, 3/4 of that is road transport. But then half of the entire emission chunk is actually energy generation. And that's where a big problem is also in the CEE, where you have a huge coal part of the energy mix and you have that whole challenge. But if we can rule out road passenger vehicle emissions quickly with electrification, then we should focus on that. And the dilution of arguments and the dilution of funds caused by the fact that we're really also diluting the discussion with, talking about technology neutrality and other such solutions, causes us to step off that path. So we're not directly targeted at getting all these goals that we were trying to achieve. And the problem with these technologies is they are not new. Some of the e-fuels and synthetics that are being brought into the market, they arise from technologies discovered in the 1920s, like the Fischer-Tropsch conversion, something we know very well. This is nothing new. And it's not very innovative. actually. Also, the hydrogen we use is not hydrogen that we want to use. It's very rarely renewable hydrogen. And this is a huge problem, to have enough excessive energy to invest into electrolyzers and actually produce renewable hydrogen. And we see with hydrogen powertrains, there is no scalability in fuel cell electric vehicle solutions. We see them dropping in all the markets where they used to be thriving. So our problem with this is there is aviation, where sustainable aviation fuels cannot exist and cannot grow, and they should grow and cannot grow without synthetic fuels, e-fuels, and that entire industry. We see the maritime transport industry, where this is essential and crucial. Without methanol, ammonia, without those fuels, we will not be able to grow this sector and decarbonize it. But in the passenger road transport, electrification is the only solution, and we have the solution. We really do have the solution. In Poland alone, we have 56 electric trailers available to electrify the heavy-duty vehicle sector. We're going to have 400 million euros subsidies for these vehicles, 400 million euros for subsidies for charging infrastructure for trucks alone, 400 million euros on top of all these to invest into charging infrastructure dedicated, to DSO connections for the charging infrastructure dedicated for trucks. So the tools are there, the funds are there. If we're going to keep on delaying targets, if we're going to keep on diluting solutions, then I think some of the policies introduced by either the US or some Asian giants will quickly surpass anything we're trying to achieve here. So that's our view, and I hope it wasn't too radical.
Radical. I mean, I heard more radical on TV. So look, I have a lot of questions, but what I'd like to go through to the speakers, because I think that then we can actually have a debate. Hopefully, the intervention will allow us the time for debate. Alessandro?
Thank you very much, Andrei, for the invitation, and it's a very interesting debate. So Fuels Europe, as you can imagine, we represent the refinery and fuel manufacturing industry, but let me start with a disclaimer. We also think electrification is a great solution. Our members, many of them are investing a lot in recharging points, in production of electricity, in batteries, whatever you can imagine. However, unlike Alexander, who just spoke, I don't think we pretend to know what the solution is, to be honest. We are more open. And what I wanted to do is share with you an eye-opening conversation I had a few days ago with a commission official. I will not mention the name. Very candidly, he told me, look, CO2 standards for cars and trucks is not about decarbonization. It is about driving the shift from internal combustion engine to electric vehicles, which left me speechless. Why? So if we go to the theory of policymaking, and according to the book, usually the process is policymakers set a target, they set the condition for different solutions to compete, a level playing field possibly, and then they let the different solutions compete and let the best solution win. Cost, convenience, customer choice. Now, this is the theory of policymaking, which is being contradicted by the CO2 standards in vehicles. So this is what we see. What is the problem we see in that? Well, simply that we waste a lot of potential advantages. There are potentials to untap. Let me mention one. Investments. Our industry, refining and fuel manufacturing, has calculated 650 billion euro to convert our operation and our products from fossil, unabated fossil, as we say, to renewable and low carbon. But 650 billion euro, it's quite significant. We can develop new supply value chain. Think of biomass so the waste from agriculture and forestry. Today, this value chain do not exist. It's a big potential to have create synergies between the agricultural sector, for example, and the fuel making. But it would be waste if the policy says not the objective is to have electric vehicles on the road. We can boost the security of domestic energy supply. Let me underline domestic, because most of these fuels would not need to have a feedstock imported from different regions of the world. So most of the feedstock will be European. Energy security is quite an important point nowadays, as we know. We will have diversity of solution, electrification, hydrogen, renewable low carbon fuels, and diversification means a lot of resistance, capability to resist to crisis, to unforeseen event. Last but not least, military defense system that could count on a supply, on a regular supply of liquid energy that we know is essential in the military system, and unfortunately it has become quite important recently. We have talked about the fuels, but please don't forget biofuels. Biofuels are a plug and play solution. They are there, so they exist today. You take biofuels from sustainable biomass, as it exists today, hydrotreated vegetable oil. You put it in your existing vehicles, internal combustion, and you decarbonize. It's there. Fuels also are very important, and they are coming, and they will come, and their costs will reduce. But let's not forget, because the conversation tends to be polarized on fuels versus electricity. There's biofuels, and they're very important. To Kilian, a comparison that we often see, it is, of course, it is clear that the efficiency in the use of energy is much higher for an electric vehicle, no doubt about that. But there is one difference that is not often considered. If you have electricity, if you have a liquid fuel, a renewable liquid fuels, you need to store it in the car. A 50-liter tank, 5 kilo of steel, something like that. If you need to store electrons, you need 1 ton of battery in the car. And to make the battery, you produce a lot of CO2, and you use a lot of energy. So I think this to be taken into account when we say the energy efficiency of the electric solution is much bigger. Let's think also of what is attached to that. Finally, I think I will close even earlier than the 10 minutes, but I'm keen to continue to the discussion. What we think is that actually the policymaking should be neutral on what the solutions are. And the way is very simple. So allow the fuels, renewable low carbon fuels, to contribute to the targets for OEMs in the CO2 standards for cars and trucks. This is the simple call that we have for policymakers.
Thank you.
I'm quite anxious to get to the discussion, but listen, like some of you, I went to Antwerp. I like Antwerp, and I don't get there often enough. But I was there, and I was very shocked because there was a very senior person in that gathering who made a statement that to me was shocking. And the statement was, I mean, this repeated talk about technology neutrality. I mean, this came from all level of European institutions. But there was one statement that was shocking. And the statement was that CO2 is not our emissions are, what was it? Emissions are not, oil and gas is not our enemy, is the emissions from oil and gas in the air that's our enemy. And that was to me, quite a shocking statement, because it was a very strong statement that kind of takes you back to Article 2 of the UNFCCC, which it talks about exactly the same thing. But it's something that applied to this, it would take you in different places. And to me, it's a very strong statement I hadn't heard before being uttered in public. Again, because it was Chatham House rules, I cannot kind of say who it was, but some of you who are there will know who it was. I would ask Stefano and Anna to now kind of make your intervention so we have the time to actually have a serious conversation here and kind of contradictory conversation, hopefully.
Yes, thanks, Andre. So I'm Stefano Murace. I'm the transport and heating policy advisor at Eurogas, which is the trade association for gaseous energy. It's a very big organization, over 100 members, very heterogeneous as well. We have all that ranges from fuel suppliers to OEMs to also technology providers, traders. It's pretty big. However, there is one thing we all agree on, and that's our position now, especially for transport. That is the topic of today's debate. We believe in the complementarity of solutions. There is not one solution, there are multiple solutions, and they are complementary. Very important. So technological neutrality. Sorry, Andre, you don't like very much that term. But this is very, very important. However, again, our members are also into electric mobility. So we need to use all solutions we have at our disposal. We need to use them now because our targets for 2030 are approaching. 2052, there is no time to waste. Now, speaking of electric mobility, one, let's say, I mean, the other panelists already mentioned some of the, let's say, bottlenecks. Of course, the grid, like we need to increase the capacity. We also need to increase storage since we are having an increasing amount of intermittent energy getting on the grid. And to that also, we need to add the issue, now speaking of the vehicles, electric vehicles are, and here I'm speaking of heavy duty vehicles, 2 to 3 times more expensive than regular trucks, let's call them like that. You also have the problem with the depot charging because, of course, you want to take all the advantages you can get from an electric truck. So you want to depot charge, but that's not always possible. You need to wait for the approvals from the authorities. It's a lot that needs to be dealt with, and that takes time. As we know, it's years, and that's not only, of course, on the, let's say, operator side, but also the energy companies themselves need to adapt the infrastructure. It's quite a burdensome process. And the problem, however, is if we look at the numbers of ASEA today, the average truck is about 14 years old. So if we go back 14 years, that's what, Euro 4, Euro 3? Let's say there's a lot of dust getting into our air that we're daily breathing. And we need to invest today. What are our alternatives? Speaking of molecules, of course, there is hydrogen, although even there, as with electrification, there is the issue with its still nascent industry. Also, the availability of hydrogen is not that, let's say, that big, especially for road transport, but this is also for let's say, the electric part of road mobility. You need high capacity chargers. However, there is one technology that is very, and Alessandro already mentioned it before, biofuels, and in particular, biomethane. As you know, Europe is the biggest producer of biomethane. Also, its like our companies are among the leaders in the market on a global scale. Very important also, biomethane allows you to cut about 25%, in the best case, CO2 emissions. You're cutting particulate, PM, you're cutting nitrous oxide, noise, and also, but that's more on the shipping side than on the road transport, sulfur oxide, and people living in harbor cities would very much thank you for that. Also very important to mention, this is an infrastructure that is already existing, so for regular methane. But for example, take Germany, the numbers of the last quarter, so Q4 of 2024, 86% of the LNG that you could tank in German tanking stations was of biological origin. And also therefore the fuel itself, depending on the feedstock, potentially, for example, I will just take manure, you can even have negative emissions. Now, this is for road transport. Let's also look into shipping. And actually, John mentioned it before. Shipping is even harder to decarbonize. You have the problem that, like, you can guess electrify maybe small ferries, local transport, yes, fresh waters, but it's not really a thing in, let's say, the longer haul, especially if you're traveling between continents. And there, for example, again, biomethane or in general methane is one of the solutions. And that's not just me promoting a fuel or saying that. If you look at the DNV order book, companies like, so shipping companies are really betting on that. Also because, and here, then I will come to my also final point after that one. You can see also the big difference in, let's say, the approach of states to decarbonization. You have Europe very much betting on biomethane, but if you go to Asia, it's much more on the synthetic zone, LNG. And this flexibility is very important. Now looking more on the policy side, like what policies do we need? We have, so for Fuel EU Maritime, refuel aviation, their methane is a bit less of a thing, but still, even on the count emissions EU, like all of these regulations have the thing that all the emissions are counted on an electricity energy life cycle assessment. So the accounting methodology is based on the emissions that are produced during the production of these fuels. Why can't we have that also for CO2 emission standards for light and heavy duty vehicles? Why does it have to be different? Especially when you have count emissions EU, which is currently in trilogue negotiations. They're using the ISO standard, which is actually based on that method. Why don't we have it also for the CO2 regulations? Thank you.
And last but not least, Anna. Please go ahead, Anna.
Yes.
Then we'll go to discussion. I think there are people, Iman, among the speakers, want to come back quite anxiously. Go ahead.
Thank you, Andre. Also, like Killian and Alessander, probably representing a minority. I'm the only woman here, so just joking, just joking.
Okay.
No, just joking. Thank you so much, Andre, and thank you much for organizing this roundtable. I think it's very timely to have this debate right now. Before I get into the questions, let me quickly introduce myself. I'm Repsol, for those who maybe don't know us. So Ana Alvarez, I've worked in Repsol for over 20 years, so I think I know a little bit about energy. I'm now the head of Repsol's Brussels office here. For those who are not Spanish and maybe don't know Repsol, we are a Spanish multi-energy company, present in over 20 countries in the world, fully committed to the energy transition. In fact, in 2019, we were the first company in our sector to pledge net zero emissions by 2050. We operate across the whole energy value chain, from traditional oil and gas to renewable electricity production. We already have in operation almost 3 gigawatts, solar and wind. Also with a pipeline of projects for renewable hydrogen, 350 megawatts, probably pending FID probably this year. And also sustainable mobility, both electrons and molecules. So we do have round about 2,500 recharging stations in Spain and Portugal. And also we are producing 100% renewable fuels from last year. We started our first 100% renewable fuel production in April last year, 2024. And we are supplying these 100% renewable fuels in our service stations already in Spain. We do have currently around about 800, over 150 service stations where you can take your car and fuel 100% renewable fuels in Spain and Portugal, with ambition to expand our network to 1,500 service stations by the end of this year. The reason why I've extended myself explaining all this is that I can see ourselves in all of you representing different sectors. So my colleague from the panel, Alessander, was saying he's very passionate and radical about electricity, electromobility. We are very passionate and radical on technology neutral approach. And I think that demonstrates in a company like Repsol that we cover all the energy solutions. I think the debate shouldn't be about choosing e-mobility or renewable fuels. It's about using all technologies available that decarbonize. And I would like to start by the second question, by challenging a common misconception from the beginning. So when we talk, sometimes the debates, or many times the debate on renewable fuels is limited to the hard-to-electrify sectors, that is maritime and aviation. And that is in the debates and the conversations here in Brussels very often. But this is a completely disconnected approach from the reality of the industrial process. So if I may just quickly, for those who are not familiar with the production process of renewable fuels, the production is an interconnected ecosystem. So it doesn't work in silos. You can't produce fuels just for one sector. And this is very important to understand, and allow me to put my hat of an engineer that I am to explain that when you put feedstock into the refineries, whether it's the conventional feedstock or is the sustainable biomass that we're using now to produce 100% renewable fuels, it goes into a process. After this refining process, you get different types of fuels that can be used for different types of sectors. It's not possible to just select one sector. So when we concentrate the conversation on, okay, let's just have renewable fuels for aviation, let's just have SAF, it's just not technically or economically feasible. So I think that's important to understand, that the road market for renewable fuels needs to be there from a technical perspective, economic perspective, but also thinking on, you know, if Europe is going to be needing renewable fuels for maritime and aviation, and the road market is not there for renewable fuels, eventually our industry could relocate to different geographies where these fuels are recognized. So eventually Europe could be dependent or more dependent or completely dependent on imports to meet the targets on refuel aviation and maritime. So that's something also a very important issue to take into account. As well as our industry, the refining industry, relocated to other geographies, and the job loss that we would face there, with tens of thousands of industrial jobs perhaps losing in the short, medium, or long term. So answering your question on what policies do we need, just two points here. The first, I think Europe needs a harmonized regulatory framework that doesn't work in silos, because the production process doesn't work in silos. So we need a coherent framework that avoids contradictions across sectors, because that's how the industry works. For the industry to invest and to have a solid business case. We haven't talked about business case. We need to have a business case that is rational and that it makes sense. And my second point on policy, the upcoming review on both the light duty and the heavy duty, CO2 standards for light duty and heavy duty, I think it goes without saying we need a technology neutral approach. This is something we've been saying for a long time. I was glad to hear yesterday President von der Leyen saying, and I'm going to quote because I wrote it here somewhere, we will prepare to speed up the work on the 2035 review with full technology neutrality as a core principle. If we really believe that, let's apply that. I would like also to be quite clear that we're not asking to change the targets. We're not questioning the what. What we're doing is questioning the how. How do we get to those targets? Just the other day, Executive Vice President Séjourné made a strong case, obviously related to other energy source, to nuclear, of course. And I'm going to quote what he said because I think it's very interesting. Everything is good as long as we decarbonize and increase Europe's energy autonomy. If there are fewer imports and this energy is carbon free, frankly, we shouldn't be asking ourselves any questions. That logic should really apply here as well in terms of renewable fuels. Yet, instead of embracing this technology, we are stuck in a very highly politicized debate. I think it's time to put pragmatism over politics and use all available solutions to reach our goals. I'm doing okay for time, so. Okay, so just to mention one other point, going into risks, I think John mentioned it before, the geopolitical risks of relying solely on electrification. And don't get me wrong, electrification is a crucial part of decarbonization, for sure. It's got to play, or is playing an important role. But there are challenges like critical raw materials, lithium, cobalt, nickel, you name it. I don't have to explain to you. They're concentrated in a few countries in the world, and the global competition for these materials, of these critical raw materials, is only getting fiercer. So if you look at renewable fuels, which they are sourced here in Europe, we can produce them here right now. What do they provide? Something essential for Europe in the current times as well, and it's stability and energy independence. So I think we shouldn't lose the opportunity to have renewable fuels. When I talk about renewable fuels, I'm talking about biofuels, advanced biofuels, and e-fuels. And we don't really have to reinvent the wheel because these fuels have already been recognized as zero emissions in use in the RED, the Renewable Energy Directive. So we have to align all the regulations to be able to allow these fuels to comply with the targets. Just to wrap up and not to extend myself much more, as a conclusion, I think we should move past the idea that there's only one way forward. Of course, electrification is part of the solution, of course, but it's not the only one. So if we really want a sustainable, secure, and competitive future, why don't we embrace all the technologies that decarbonize and renewable fuels included? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I can say, let's make transportation great again. Good. Look, one I'll ask people is to make short statements or short intervention. Otherwise, frankly, we're a little bit over time. And over time, I would prefer to start earlier. So I'm looking at those folks, as they say, on the screen. So please raise your hand and we'll give you the floor. And those people that have on the panel. But I will again ask everybody to be short and to the point and not kind of start another intervention because that's not going to get us anywhere. So John, you want to start first?
Yeah, thanks, Andre. I'll try and be short, but also a bit provocative. Look, obviously there are strong arguments for electrification, but I still don't hear, is the current position justified? I mean, if we look at 75% of customers are still buying a car with an internal combustion engine. 90% of transport globally, at least, is still done on a liquid fuel. We've got 90 days supply of liquid fuels at any one time. We'll never, ever get close to that with electrification. We've got rest of the world demand for hybrids and internal combustion engines for going a long time into the future. But we've got a policy that focuses entirely on a policy wish for the home market, and that is forcing European car makers into a very difficult position. They've already had to do joint ventures with China and the US, and that's getting a very hard place to be. And so, given what Alessandro heard from the Commission, actually a private admission, of course it's an equipment mandate, not a CO2 policy. Is it not a case that we should go back and ask the Commission to own up and say, yes, it's an equipment policy, and that means actually it should be reopened, reviewed, and possibly readjusted. And
Okay.
if that is, yeah, I would go back to the electricity industry and say, if it's not a ban, what do you need to continue with the investments, with the progress? Because for sure we need electrification, but I would postulate the ban is not justified. Thanks.
Let me go first to Killian and then to Alexander. The microphone to Killian. Sorry, there, Killian. And let me turn my off so it doesn't buzz.
Sure. It's not electricity outage, is okay. So no, just three comments. So why is society so aggressive on electrification of transport, particularly light duty vehicles? It's because in the transition, there's stuff that's hard to do and there's stuff that's easy to do. You know, I've been in Brussels almost 15 years now. I've looked at it from different aspects, and transport and light duty vehicles is the easy stuff to do. That's why you need to electrify it. If you look at sectors like steel, sectors like chemicals, it gets very, very complex. So that's why we should be focusing on the simple things and doing them. Second thing is, I came here today kind of to learn more about the viable alternatives to electrification. And a lot of it has rather been kind of criticism of electrification. We don't have the raw materials, which I've already shown we do. We don't have the grids, which we can do. But what I haven't seen is people presenting to me saying, we can do these alternatives at scale, and this is how we do it. I haven't seen that. I've just seen kind of vague promises saying, let's leave it open, let's push technology neutrality, without people showing it. What we can do, of course, is we can keep with internal combustion engine cars and we can push this mantra, but we haven't shown that we can do this and still reach our climate targets. That's the thing. So I get we can still use cars based on liquid fuels. That's obvious. We know that. But can we do it in a way which is compatible with our climate goals? And I haven't seen today how we can do it. And unless we show that, what the perception is out there is that this kind of lifting the ICE ban for 2035, it's just a story. It's just a story so we can keep running cars on fuels like we're doing today. And when it comes to 2035, we're going to keep doing it because we're afraid of losing to the Chinese and others in terms of EVs. That's the perception out there. It's the one I had coming here today, and it still hasn't been changed. I need to be honest.
I have a question here written to myself. Can somebody explain how e-fuels or sustainable fuels can help net zero? That's the kind of question that I had written here for myself. Alexander, and then we can come back, but I'm also looking for the people in the audience to be active and alive. Go ahead, Alexander, please.
Yeah, well, thank you. I do have a similar kind of feeling. There was a resounding initiation of every statement that electrification is the foundation to end almost every statement with basically throwing it off the table, saying it's just one of the very many ways. It is not. It is not. As I said, the energy sector can decarbonize in various ways. Various other branches of transport do have other solutions to pursue. Road transport does not. And e-fuels are not zero emission fuels, and calling them renewable, calling them, a means of decarbonization, they're transitive solutions. And the problem is we don't have time for transitive solutions. We're already exceeding the average temperature levels. We're already exceeding the climate impact that we have caused. So transitive solutions that were good in the 90s and the 2000s at the beginning were a good solution. We do have this feeling, I can tell you that we were once being convinced to support the activities of the eFuel Alliance, and we were convinced by ExxonMobil. I hear a lot of the discussion on how e-fuels are renewable, mostly from the oil and gas industry, trying to convince us that the lack of the need to replace infrastructure or dispensers or whatever else is not an argument here. I think it is. I think also the discussion on the lack of availability of critical raw materials, when everyone who's been 1 centimeter away from the battery industry, and at least has spoken to somebody who's professionally involved in the manufacturing and the metallurgy and everything else, knows it's the refining processes that are the key here, not the access to the deposits, which are very, very abundant. And moreover, with the 96% recyclability rate of LFP batteries, which are now becoming the predominant and universal technology really all over the world, but certainly in Europe, you really don't have a problem with the access to raw materials, the critical raw materials, because you're just going to get them from recycling. So it's always down, I think, to the facts, and the facts are, I think, still, and I wish to emphasize that for passenger road transport, really mobility has no alternative. And that's, I think, the key argument. We can talk about e-fuel appliances for any other areas, but not for passenger road mobility. So that's just my kind of final statement. Thanks.
You can always make a deal on you can always find a deal on raw materials. Look, I have two questions in my mind. If I, look, I'm an electrician. I'm not against EVs. I'd love to have one, but I have two questions. One of them is indeed, are these things, and this is for, presumably for the people, are these sustainable fuels really decarbonized? I mean, are they really, can somebody explain this for the ordinary people, for the hoi polloi? Are they really zero carbon or not? And the second thing that I will turn also to my friends that are on the other side of the equation and say, if you guys are so convinced of the righteousness of your cause, why do you need mandates? I mean, that's usually why the mandate? I mean, if it's the better mousetrap, it's going to win. So do you want to start, and then I'm happy to go back.
I would love to react to some things, because there were thrown some things out that I would like to react on at least. So no need for elbows, guys. It's would love to have a great discussion, but not this kind of argument sometimes. But yeah. I saw you raise your hand, so I will leave the red compliance and to you maybe. You wanted to hear like some proposals. I mean, you had to listen then. I was saying we have the position of 5% e-fuels until 2030. That is our red position. So, of course, opening the car legislation has to be also done together with the fuel side of the legislation. So talking about Renewable Energy Directive. I also wanted to reiterate, and Anna told that really good, leaving out the road sector is crucial for the easy solutions, you say. If you want to address those sectors with the capacity they need at a price they can pay, then road is key. So there is no easy or hard way. It's an ecosystem, and you have to understand that it's an ecosystem without picking a sector that you want to favor over the others. But I might stop here because the other one, I saw you raising your hand on that too.
So, yes, just quickly, very interesting, Kilian, what you were saying, and also you, Alessandra. Just wanted to, I don't know if I made myself clear, but I think I did put on the table realities from our perspective, realities of what's happening now. I think I did say we do have more than 800 service stations where you can supply your car with 100% renewable fuels. That is happening now. And that's happening now because we already producing 100% renewable fuels from sustainable waste. So that's not something for the future. That is, I don't know if I got right what you were trying to say, but we've put on the table realities, and we've put on the table how to get to those realities in the future to scale them up. It's very simple. We can start building more plants and produce more renewable fuels if we have the market. We're ready to do so, but we need the market. I think, from the industry perspective, I was quite down to earth, trying to just bring to the table that we are a reality now. Just wanted to comment on that.
I kind of insist that I'm the moderator here, and I'd like somebody to pick up my questions. Are these things really carbon zero? And the other question is, if this is a better mousetrap, why do you need a mandate? Because maybe it's personal history, but I'm allergic to mandates, but maybe just me. Go ahead.
Can I address the first part? So your first question, is a renewable fuel really zero? It depends on what is the perspective. So if you look at the tailpipe emission, yes, it is, because it emits only recycled CO2, circular, absorbed from the atmosphere by biomass or by man, in the case of fuels. It becomes a fuel, it is emitted, and then again. So what is important is the concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere. Does a renewable fuel increases the concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere? No. Is it climate neutral? Yes, if you look at the tailpipe. But it's not only tailpipe. Let's expand. Let's go to the tank to wheel. So you need to use energy to produce the fuel, and then possibly you emit CO2. But so also electricity. Alexander, in your country, the grid is not exactly 100% green. So actually, when you put electricity from your grid to an electric vehicle, there is emission of CO2. So it is comparable, the two. And then when it gets really interesting, when you go into the life cycle, so you consider also the CO2 from the manufacturing of the vehicle. And then you have a battery, a big CO2 emitter, let's say the manufacturing causes a lot of emissions there, much less for the internal combustion engine. So you see that there is a fair competition between. It depends on what approach you take.
Look, let me come back now with Alexander first, and then I don't know if anybody wants to react to. I mean, there's a statement explaining that this is neutral, doesn't put additional stuff. If anybody wants to react to that, I'm perfectly open to allow that. But Alexander, you go first, please.
Yeah, the capturing of CO2 with the atmosphere and what comes in, what happens at the tailpipe is never one-to-one, and I think that's chemistry, first-grade chemistry. But anyway, I think what's important is why we need the mandate for electric vehicles. It's because the lobby against electromobility and full battery electrification of fleets is really strong. And I think there are really huge forces at play trying to delay this, which we're actually witnessing at the moment. That's why the mandates were so important. And in particular, and I have to say this, I'm not very proud of this, but in Central Eastern Europe, the mentality, there is a post-communist mentality. There's a very different mentality here. If you can put your foot through the door to have some kind of wiggle room in a regulation, it will be used. So unless you have very strict rules on how to play, there will always be ways to pursue some, cheaper, simpler solutions, or basically not changing anything at all. And that's what's prevailing in Central Eastern Europe. And this is something we were really happy for because as I said, again, nearly half of Europe, it's really important to have very precise targets that are not changed every couple of years, but are very, very decisive. And I hope that gives you an answer for why we need a mandate.
Alexander, I apologize. First of all, I am from Central and Eastern Europe. And I tell you what, I lived in Geneva, and what you described to me is a bunch of traders finding arbitrage between different things. So I don't think it's unique to Central Eastern Europe. But the second thing is, which is more concerning to me, I didn't get what you said. I apologize for that. Why do you need a mandate if you think it's a better mousetrap? I mean, I understand that you need clarity, you know, that you shouldn't change. The argument is that you shouldn't change target and so on. I'm half Central Eastern European, half Canadian, because I lived on both sides and most of my life in Canada. And we call that, we try something, if it doesn't work, we try something else, as opposed to, so I'm not that allergic to changing legislation. I think legislation in general changes, or this, I think that Killian and Alessandro and all the people in this room are trying to do one way or another, trying to change legislation in one direction or another. That's what I think. We get paid to do, no? So sorry, and I'm not here being facetious. I appreciate you being here, but I'm trying to understand, why do you think that the mandate is necessary? I mean, if we're going in that direction, okay, you may not go at the speed that you want. you may not go at the speed that you want. You may think that you want to go faster. That's an explanation that I'll buy. I'm just telling you as somebody who is somewhat neutral, I think. Is that a correct interpretation, or that's not the right interpretation?
I think, yeah, I was trying to make it very, very emphasized. We do not want a diluted discussion, and I think delaying or changing dilutes the discussion. I started my way of explaining this mandate necessity by the fact that I think the lobby pursuing full decarbonization with battery electric powertrains being much, much weaker than the lobby of any other industry. And that's why I think those mandates were a great success. So this Z mentality was just an addition. I apologize for that.
I always say where I'm from, we're bad, but there are worse people in Europe than us. Stefano.
Yeah, I just wanted to react to a couple of things that Alexander said. Now, starting from the last one, where you were about chemistry, one-to-one CO2 emissions. Yes, I agree with you. And if you use stuff like biomethane, it can even be carbon negative. Because, as you know, for the production of the biomethane from manure, the manure, if you leave it lying there, you have methane going into the air, while if you burn it in an internal combustion engine, it's CO2, and it's the same CO2 you will find again then in the plants, which then will end up again as feed to animals. So yes, it can be negative indeed. Then another point on the raw materials. If I'm not totally mistaken, it's the Critical Raw Materials Act. We had to get up to a refining of what, 40% by 2035, and also at the same time 15% of domestic extraction. So we're not nearly to be self-sufficient on that front. So that's actually a big dependency we also have to keep in mind. So if we have alternatives, biofuels, which are locally produced, we should definitely look at them. And also to Andrei's question on the how and on the mandates, the how. I mean, we actually already have the legislation. Like, we need just to change, let's say, additional part of that. Like, we have the red. It tells us how much renewable fuel has to get into the energy mix, into the system to decarbonize. The only problem is we have this disagreement with the CO2 emission standards regulation. That's the point.
Sorry, apologies. You kept your hands up, and you shouldn't have to do that. I apologize. Go ahead, please. You're muted, I think, John. I think you're very persuasive, but you're muted. Can you unmute the mic, maybe?
Yeah, sorry, I
don't know
thought
how
there were
to-
other people in the room. You could see their hand up. Well, look, I was going to come back and argue that actually the most reliable policy for investors in the long term is one that's based on science. And at the moment, we have a vehicle policy that doesn't even reference the red. And to illustrate the absurdity of it, Alexander, you come from a country with a lot of coal-fired power generation. You put that power into an EV, and it suddenly becomes a zero-emission vehicle. And to build on that, if we actually take the biomass and we put it into the power station is given a rating of zero emission under ETS. And so strangely, the biomass, it's zero emission if it's stationary, and it's treated like fossil emission if it's in a vehicle. It's not a CO2 policy for the vehicle. It's an equipment mandate. And I would argue that as long as it remains something like that, it will have questions about whether actually it deserves its place. I would suggest you're in the stronger position here. You've got the mandate for your industry to have an exclusive monopoly, if you like, in technology in the future. And that is certainly limiting the investment in any kind of alternative fuel right now in Europe. And so I think the question has not yet really been answered. Is the electricity industry deserving, or is that technology deserving a ban on its competition? I think that is still a question that is to be answered by all of the stakeholders, including the Commission. And this discussion has made something of a case for looking at alternatives. I think the question is still open, to be honest.
What do you think, Ilya?
So yeah, I leave here today more confident than when I arrived. I need to be honest. I haven't heard that many convincing arguments that there is alternatives there which are scalable. I repeat, I've heard a lot of attacks, even now, about the raw materials. There's a challenge on the raw materials. But you know what you need to do in Europe, you need to reshore some of the refining. The Chinese were clever. They identified that the world is going to electrify. They invested heavily in both the extraction of raw materials and the refining. And as Europe, we have to catch up, but that is something which is doable. That's how I see it. In terms of the ban for 2035, this is not something as a sector which we're obsessed with. But what we do think is it gives a very clear signal. It says, okay, as Europe, we're going to electrify transport. That allows us to plan the grids. Yeah. That allows us to put in place the charging infrastructure. That allows us to invest in necessary power generation. It sends a very clear signal. It also sends a clear signal to the value chains. Yeah. So the batteries, which is the key component. And the issue here, which no one really is discussing, is as Europe, we're very good at ICE cars. Yeah. It's very complex technology. We do it very well, particularly in Germany. EVs is about battery technology, and we're not as good as the Chinese. We're behind on that. So we need to be able to compete, and we need to catch up on that. And that's what we should be concentrating on. We should be concentrating on being able to compete with the Chinese in production of EVs, but luxury and cheaper EVs, and double down and focus on that, not scaling back and focusing on these technologies which are just not scalable from what I've seen. That's just how I see it.
Well, and you know, and you know, those of you who know Walter Cronkite, and that's the way it is. Well, look, thank you very much for this discussion, and maybe we didn't do such a good job in being pointed in our question, and because we should, you know, maybe have had that discussion. Ask the question: is are these really carbon neutral, and are they scalable? Maybe next discussion, which there's there's a rather obvious. There's a person there that wants to ask a question. Is that correct? Yeah, man, I'm not gonna let you go. Please humor me, because I mean I've been waiting for this guy for the last hour and a half. Can you tell us who you are, please?
Hi, I'm Sasha Dansky, and I'm a former student from Cambridge, and I'm currently doing a bit of research on road freight decarbonization. And I was a bit surprised by a few things that I've heard today. And so about the question of scalability, so the answer was that we already have biofuels, but if we wanted to convert a significant part of all the traffic with biofuel, we wouldn't have enough waste to do that. And so the second alternative is e-fuels, but they have a ridiculous energy efficiency, as it was said earlier. And so I'm not sure to really understand where is the scalability that a few members here seems to believe exists.
Thank you very much. I think that now they're all kind of fighting which one is going to answer this one. Who wants to? Okay, you guys, Lars, you want to go? I will. Can I hand over the mic? I'm sorry, we're poor. We only have one mic.
So the questions on efficiency and scalability, and of course, e-fuels are scalable, and the availability of renewable energy is globally not a problem. What you can imagine, e-fuels can also be like energy storage. So you can produce them wherever you want, where abundant renewable energy is available. That's a storage option. It's easy transportable. It solves basically the problems of distribution and storage of energy globally. You can look that up in Fraunhofer studies, for example. There's a PTX atlas. The capacity to produce e-fuels is 3 times as much as transport globally. So in terms of scalable, that's not a problem. That refers, but also to the question about mandates. Why do we need mandates? Because, of course, why do we use the energy we use today? Because it's cheaper. So mandates help to establish a market. Do we want to have mandates forever? I don't know yet, probably not. At some point, market is better, in my opinion. That's my personal opinion. That's not an association position, but for creating a market, mandates help because they secure your investment because it has a market to deliver to.
Yeah, well, I think, again, thank you very much. I hope it answered some of your question. If not, I think you can catch them on the way out. Look, I will be biased, look, Lars, and I'll tell you quite honestly, I'm not horribly big on mandates. I don't think we ban horses in order to make place for cars. I think horses kind of went away because there was too much manure. But having said that, and we didn't ban, stones, in order to get to the Iron Age. So yeah, I'm sorry, I'm being flippant now a little bit, but again, this is who we are. We are not big on mandates, and if some people are big on mandates, that if we all agree, we won't have a debate, right? So that's what it is. But I want to stop here and thank, first of all, Alexander, for kind of jumping in late in the game, but I think a very persuasive and very strong argument, and I really appreciate this, Alexander. If you are in Brussels, I really hope you come by. And right now we're in a little small office because we're renovating the building, but you're welcome to join us. John couldn't join us, and he's in London, but I'm sure that there will be other opportunities. And then, of course, Anna and the minority, and Lars and Stefano and Killian and Alessandro, but also Marino, who has put this thing together with a lot of passion and a lot of interest. Look, we want to continue this debate because it's an honest debate. We are terribly sorry that Killian and Alessandro has been somewhat imbalanced. We have made repeated calls to TNE and E3G and all the Gs that you can imagine. They were not available for this debate. We hope that next time they will be available for the debate. And we are, again, we hope that we run what is an honest shop and an honest debate, and that everybody had the opportunity. And I think that at least from that point of view, you enjoyed somewhat this discussion. Again, thank you all very much. And we'll try to come back and continue as the debate evolves in the public domain. Thank you all.